Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Maharashtra Vriksha Samvardhini Pune, I welcome you all to today's Philately Lecture Series, event number 7. It is my honor to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Rameshkumar. Dr. Rameshkumar did his MSc from Cochin University of Science and Technology in Meteorology. He did his PhD from Goa University on surface heat budget of the Indian Ocean. In 1982, he joined National Institute of Oceanography, Goa. His areas of specialization are ocean atmosphere interaction, monsoon, cyclones, climate change, Antarctic study, etc. In 2019, he retired as the chief scientist. He was a member of the 6th Indian Scientific Expedition to Antarctica during 1986-87 to carry out several oceanographic measurements. He has given more than 400 talks on Antarctica to various schools and colleges all over India. Interestingly, during his every talk, he always distribute books on Antarctica, Antarctica rocks, penguin feathers, chocolates to students. Because I attended his lecture few years back. He was in Pune, and in one day, single day, he has given 4 lectures for different type of audience. 2 lectures for school children, 1 lecture in Wadia College, after that for meteorology department. He is a renowned philatelist of Goa. He has participated in several district, state, and national level philately exhibitions and bagged several medals. He has published many articles on philately in national and international journals. He is a former president of Goa Philately and Numismatic Society. With this short introduction, now I request Dr. Rameshkumar to deliver his talk. Dr. Rameshkumar.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ajit Vartak ji. Let me start my talk. Can it be seen now or?
Yeah. Yes, can be seen. Only full screen karo.
Yeah, I'll make it full screen. Let me go to the first slide, sir.
Yes, from first slide.
So first of all, let me thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity. And I can see several of my fellow Antarcticans, Dr. Rasik Ravindra, Dr. Ajay Darji, I think other is actually Mukherjee ji. I don't know for sure. So I was a member of the 6th Indian Scientific Expedition to Antarctica way back in 1986-87, where our late Dr. H. Parlekar was the expedition chief. And we had our station commander, Dr. Vinod Dargalkar, who was actually at Dakshin Gangotri at that time, Dr. Pai Fondekar from the Chemical Oceanography Division, Dr. Baban Ingole from the Marine Biological Oceanography Division, Dr. Joaquin Goyes, again from the Biological Oceanography Division. If you look at the main difference between Arctic and Antarctica is actually, Arctic is an ocean and Antarctica is a continent. And all the adjectives which you use or see in the dictionary is actually applicable to Antarctica. The coldest, the windiest, the driest, the barren, the scariest, you name anything. Each and everything is actually applicable to Antarctica and maybe much more. So in this first slide itself, I have put, recently we have released with the help of Dr. M Ravichandran, who is currently the Secretary Ministry of Earth Sciences, and Javed Mirza Beg sir, who is currently the Director of NCPOR. Several, let us say, postcards on Antarctica. No doubt we had actually done a few before, and I will show you a couple of postcards which are made by Uttaranchal Philatelic Association and by Abhay Misra Ji Group, etc. So I won't go into the details. So these 2 postcards, one gives actually is the coldest continent and it is 70 degrees colder than the Arctic. And also the various research stations which are in Antarctica. There are about 70 research stations in Antarctica, including 2 currently of Maitri and Bharati. Now, I would like to start my talk by giving pranams to my gurus. The first and the foremost guru is my late father, M.B. Ranganatha Pai, who introduced me to this hobby of the king or the king of the hobbies at a very young age, maybe when I was actually 5 or 6 years old only. I was also introduced this fantastic hobby by late Sri G. Balakrishna Das, one of the founding members of actually Southern India Philatelic Association, who has been instrumental in molding me and several things. I also would like to thank Sri B.R. Navelkar, who is actually the founding member of Goa Philately and Numismatic Society. In fact, he was the person who introduced me to this topic of actually Antarctic Philately theme. In fact, I started this Antarctic theme at a very late stage because after my 6th expedition only, I thought, why not collect this carrier cover and such things? So he mentioned to me that such a thing exists. Now, what all things are my philatelic interest? No doubt, I put a few themes starting with Antarctica, the biodiversity in India, the Cochin postal history, first day covers of India, Goa's culture and heritage, language and literature of India, maxim cards, almost all different types. Portuguese India, being in Goa, I collect that. Travancore postal history and weather and climate, because I am basically a meteorologist, so I collect weather and climate also. Now there have been several this ones. So let me start with Antarctic timeline. So here I have a cover which actually shows the James Cook circumnavigating this Antarctic water. So there have been several curves. I only put one. And then Bellinghausen actually of USSR, Bransfield again from UK, Palmer from US. Like that, there are several important milestones which I don't want to read out. But a few things are actually Mawson, Douglas Mawson leads the first scientific expedition, and maybe he looks at actually the, let us say, magnetic south, way back actually in 1929 to 31. We had also the IGY, International Geophysical Union, this one, and also Antarctica Treaty. At that point of time, there were only 12 nations who signed that initial this one, and several observatories or let us say research stations were actually done during that period. Now, when did the various research stations started? So you can see in this first row, you can see the research stations of Argentina were started first. I have several of the Argentinian expedition covers. I'll come to that a little bit later. And later in 1954, Australia. I have also lots of Australian Antarctic territory thing. The most recent one being the Belarus it's actually a split of actually the USSR. I won't go into the details of all these things. I can also mention about Ukraine. I have actually a card, which I'll show it to you a little bit later. How the Ukraine purchased actually the one station from UK as well as the research vessel. Also, James Clark Ross. Now, a lot of my friends in this Antarctica group were mentioning to me that I should mention a little bit of geology. So I thought the formation of Antarctica, Pangea, Gondwana land, the continental drift, etc. In fact, this first theory of this continental drift was actually luckily formulated by actually a gentleman called Alfred Wegener. And you can see in this various types, starting from 260 million years ago, then 230, 200, 175, and up to the present time. You can see the evolution of the Gondwana, or this one you can see philately, and we have another, let us say, miniature sheet which actually shows of Mongolia. Now, who are the explorers? In fact, Antarctica has been actually, let us say, in good old days, starting UK, United Kingdom and Norway, people who had actually gone there, basically for food, basically for whaling, because UK and Norway were actually about 50, 60 degrees north. From they went all the way to 50, 60 degrees south, basically for whaling, not for much of actually of this. So basically it is actually a whaling expeditions which has been going on for several this one. So in this cover, you can, let us say this slide, you can see Roald Amundsen, who has actually gone, a lot of polar researchers from UK, France, and Scott, and there's actually a nice cancellation of Sir Ernest Shackleton. I won't go into the details of that. Now, everybody wants to grab a piece of actually of land of Antarctica. And so people have been trying different methods, starting from Chile. The Chilean people sent actually a newlywed couple to conceive a child in Antarctica way back in 1978 to legitimize their claim for the continent. And Argentina people sent several pregnant women to give birth so that they can become a native citizen of Antarctica. So what did the British people do? So British people also started actually having looking at a different angle. They started actually a post office in a place called Port Lockroy, where people can send postcards, and then they will say it's actually a British old outpost. Anyway, we won't go to the details of that. So, but this is a place from where they can send the letters to all over India. Now, how do we start? Let me say, I will start with my own expedition of the 6th expedition. So we started from Goa, and then we had actually a small stopover, or let us say Port Louis in Mauritius, and then we further. On the way, we stopped at several places to do oceanographic, let us say, experiments on the way. So I have actually two set of miniature sheets on the 1911-1914 Australasian Antarctic Expedition. How do they explore and various things? They give actually the departure and the journey of the Antarctic expedition, and the second one also. And there's a ship again from the NC port. Now, one of the most important transport systems actually in Antarctica has been Huskies. And they were actually introduced by the Australian Antarctic program way back in 1954. And it's the first station of Mawson. And they were strong and willing workers, and they were used for travel in the field for almost 40 years. In addition to being a reliable form of actually transport, they also provided friendship and loyalty to the Antarctic expeditioners. Belgium has been a country which has actually spent quite a lot of time and resources on West Antarctica. And the first Belgian Antarctic expedition was in way back 1897-99. And they were the first people to winter over Antarctica. And here you can see a cover of 100 years of Belgian expedition. And also they have the highest peak, Mount Vinson in Antarctica, is actually done by a Belgian team. I won't go into the details of that. Now, there have been several stamps. In fact, the Australians were actually the first people to have actually a stamp on 2 shilling blue stamp designed with a map of Australian Antarctic territory. The original stamp was actually designed in 1957. This stamp has been actually valid both in the Australian Antarctic territory region and entire Australia. So this was actually way back done. This is actually, I would say, the first day of the show, or first day cover, you can see it. And you can see the explorers of the South Pole and the Docklands team were also released. And Australia has been doing a tremendous amount of job. You can start from looking at actually the various milestones of Australian Antarctic territory. Starting from 1901 to 1911, we have actually series of discoveries they did. And 1911 to 1931, they were in the exploration mode. 1948 to 1916, they were in the settlement mode. And 1970 to 2001, they had actually a series of communication and technology, which they have done extremely well. There's a subtle difference between actually the geography and the magnetic core. So here are a few covers which actually shows. And here also we can see a decade of actually the South Pole expedition led by our Dr. Rasik Ravindra, who was the earlier former director of NCPOR. You can see this actually released in 2021. And I have also a cover which actually on 2010 to 2011 also cover the first South Pole expedition cover also of Rasik Ravindra. So you can see the first is like Australian, and this one you can see, and also they are quite, anyway, I won't go into the details. Another interesting card of actually Australian Antarctic territory is actually the various flags, which are actually put over the South Pole, you can see, and also a fantastic stamp on Aurora Australis with the first day of cancellation, that's on 20th June 1991. Antarctic Treaty had actually come into force in 23rd June of 1961, after the ratification by the 12 countries, Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, USSR, South Africa, UK, and USA, who were then active actually in Antarctica signed. The whole idea of this one is actually to demilitarize Antarctica, to establish this as a free zone for nuclear test and disposal of radioactive waste, to ensure that that is actually used only for peaceful purposes only, to promote the international scientific cooperation in Antarctica, and to set aside disputes of various territorial sovereignties. For example, British used to say it is their territory, Australia used to say it is their territory, Chileans used to say it is Argentinian. So everybody wanted to have actually a size or piece of actually of Antarctica. But then Antarctica Treaty has actually overrode over it, but people still this one. And there are several FDCs. One is actually of that, and Argentina again, another of New Zealand, another of USSR, another of actually West Germany. And there have been several modes of transport. Unlike over the land, over Antarctica, they have used. In fact, Dr. Rasik Ravindra, Ajay Darji, and a lot of people who had actually gone further to the South Pole, they might have used Huglands. That's a Swedish dual cab medium size over snow vehicles, which can go, and actually very, very different from the typical this one. We have actually used snow doos or ski doos or maybe snowmobiles. We have actually used, and there are lots of helicopters of both Indian Navy and Indian Air Force, and also people have been using ships also, boats also in for various this one. And there have been different fields of Antarctic research. In fact, I did actually on meteorology. You can see there are actually one stamp of the British Antarctic Territory, which actually shows the ozone hole over Antarctica. The same is actually, you can see in another miniature sheet, which actually shows the ozone hole over Antarctica. That is the preserve the polar regions. And there have been several stamps actually on the Antarctic research in various fields by the New Zealand as well as by Australian Antarctic Territory. And I won't go into the details of that. So coming to the India, the first scientific expedition to Antarctica was led by our former director, late Dr. S.S. Qasim, way back in 81, and he reached Antarctica on 9th of January, 1982. And you can see there are two different first day covers with the two different cancellations. One with is actually with a baby cancellation of the first Indian scientific expedition, and other is actually with actually a ship cancellation. You can see within the first day covers, I don't know whether it's a rare thing or maybe this one, or I don't know for sure. I have also included an information sheet, again, which was actually made by the India Post and Telegraphs way back in, this is actually on 9th January 1983. This is actually a chart which I have actually taken in a book written by actually Sri Abhay Misraji from Deal. It's actually Defense Applied Electronics Applied Laboratory of DRDO from Dehradun. In this, you can see there are 4 red-colored, let us say, expedition leaders. All are from NI only. Dr. S.S. Qasim was actually the first expedition leader who went by MV Polar Circle and Arrow Antarctica way back in 1982. Dr. A.H. Perlekar, who was an expedition leader of the late Dr. A.H. Perlekar, who was actually the 6th expedition leader, and we reached in Antarctica on 21st of December 1986. Robinson Gupta again, late Robinson Gupta again from Chemical Oceanography Division, again from NIO, and my own friend and colleague, Dr. Vinod Dargal, led actually the 12th expedition. We won't go into the details of that. Only one thing I would like to stress is actually on the 9th expedition, we had actually 2 different vessels going to Antarctica. One is actually on MV Thuleland, other is on Polar John, into 2 different areas. One is into the Weddell Sea and the other is actually into the Antarctic region. A couple of, let us say, months back, my colleague Ajay Dar was mentioning that actually the postmasters, no doubt the postmasters started actually coming to Antarctica scenario only from the 7th expedition. But we did have actually cancellations from the first expedition onwards, which actually can be seen from the book prepared by Abhay Misraji. It's actually Indian Antarctic Expedition, a Philatelist Guide. I'll show it to you in the end, and it can always be obtained from the Amazon. This one, you can see there are several people who actually rendered their services actually honorary postmasters of actually the Indian Antarctic post offices. One important thing about Antarctica is actually there are so much of mountain ranges. In fact, Antarctica is the highest altitude continent anywhere in the world. In fact, if you look at Asia, Africa, and other countries, it's one of the highest altitude continents anywhere in the world. There have been several mountain ranges. I won't go into that. And there are also ice flows in Antarctica, which is actually a very, very cool thing to have a look at it. They are called frost flowers or ice flowers. There have been several pictures of actually icebergs. In fact, on the bottom side is actually a picture which has been taken by me during my 6th scientific expedition to Antarctica. I always used to say, there's the English saying that tip of an iceberg. When we say tip of an iceberg, only 1/10 is seen above, 9/10 is below. And you can see another picture is actually of that from NC4. You can see, and this has been prepared by the Goa Postal Division, just to show you. And there have been several information on the penguins of Antarctica. So the first one is actually prepared by the Uttaranchal Philatelic Association. And the second one is again from NC4. The third one is actually from the People's Republic of China. You can see lots of penguins and the Guinea-Bissau. And in fact, as I mentioned, Argentina were the first people to have actually established. So there have been several stations of actually Argentina. One is actually Brown and other is actually Esperanza. So two cancellations of these different research stations in Argentina are actually shown in these two covers. And Australia has actually several this ones like say Davis, Casey, Mawson, etc. In fact, my colleague, Dr. Vinod Dargalkar spent 1 year of wintering in Davis in Australian camp, even before joining, I think, our Dakshin Gangotri. And Belgium, as I mentioned, has actually several expeditions which had actually gone to Antarctica. These are some of the stamps and the miniature sheets of actually this one. In fact, Brazil, in fact, most of the South American countries, whether it's Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Peru, all these countries have actually sent expeditions to Antarctica. So this is actually a Brazilian Antarctic program. And they have several expeditions which go into that. As I said, Chile. Chile not only has actually expeditions, they are also into the tourism also. In fact, maybe a year or two back, I saw an advertisement way back in Kerala. If you have actually 6 lakh rupees in your pocket, you can either fly from Cochin to Chile or to Argentina by air. And from there, they will take you by a ship. So you can go to Antarctica as actually a tourist guy also. So Chile as well as Argentina and several countries are actually doing. When I went during the 6th expedition to Antarctica, I visited the Russian station. And within the Russian station, there was actually a small East German camp, that's called DDR, Deutsch, this one. So I had actually met, and these are some of the first day covers actually the East German Antarctic, let's say, stations. Similarly, we had actually West Germany also had, because prior to 1990, both were actually separate. Both East Germany and Germany were separate. On 3rd October 1990 only, we had actually the reunification of actually East and West Germany, and they formed into one. So these are the philatelic covers of actually the West Germany. The French also had a strong presence actually in Antarctica. These are a couple of covers which actually showed Dumont-Urville station and another station. As far as India is concerned, my collection starts from the 3rd scientific expedition cover. The first picture shows actually the cover of actually the 3rd Indian scientific expedition with Dakshin Gangotri cancellation. This is what I wanted to stress to Ajay Darji. Maybe the 1st and the 2nd expedition also they had. And next is actually, which was led by the 4th expedition, led by Dr. B.B. Bhattacharya. We call it a carrier cover. I also had actually a cover on the 1st post office actually in Antarctica. It's actually called Dakshin Gangotri post office. I also had actually the 5th expedition carrier cover, and the 6th expedition cover with a nice round blue cancellation of actually Dakshin Gangotri with the signatures of Dr. A.H. Parlekar and Vinod Dargalkar, also with actually a Dakshin Gangotri cancellation. The 2nd station is actually, research station is actually of Maitri. You can see actually the first cancellation of Maitri was actually, we call it actually a branch sub post office. So the rectangular branch sub post office was actually, you can actually see here over this, and there have been other places also. There was actually Maitri post office as recently as actually during the 40th Indian scientific expedition to Antarctica. Myself and the senior superintendent of post offices, Dr. Sudhir Jakreji, went and met, and we had a discussion with Dr. M. Ravichandran, who was the then director at NCPOR, and Javed Mirza Begji, and we started off thinking actually making a fantastic cover with a silver cancellation of the Maitri station. So you can see this is the result of that. This one. And I also used to send regularly, which I had followed it with B.R. Nailkarji, of sending various covers to Antarctica and getting them cancelled. So you can see about the Bharati cancellation as well as one interesting thing which I wanted to mention is actually whether it's a Dakshin Gangotri, Maitri or Bharati, all of them have actually the same pin code of actually Goa Panjim or head post office, that is 403001. And this is actually again an interesting picture postcard of Lake Priyadarshini, which was prepared by actually the Uttaranchal Philatelic Association. I wanted to show a picture of me, Dr. Pai Fondaker, Dr. Joachim Goyes, and Baban Ngole. Just on the, let us say, this one's of actually Lake Priyadarshini. So we did a survey. In fact, Dr. Joachim Goyes and Baban Ngole were actually the first two people to dive into Antarctica and collect sediments. And this is a picture of me way back in 1986-87. That's about 35 years back. I had a little bit amount of hair, but now I am become baldy. So climate change has actually taken place over me also, I can say. And some of the picture postcards which are actually taken by the Maitri station and Bharti station. And in fact, the name Maitri was actually given by late Prime Minister Srimati Indira Gandhi because it was very close to the Russian station, Novolasaraya station. And it is also very close to the Priyadarshini Lake, named after our late Prime Minister Srimati Indira Gandhi. Bharti station also, I won't go into the details of that. Japan also had actually, Japan has been a whaling country and they had a strong presence also over Antarctica, especially from IGY, that's the International Geophysical Year. And they had series of expeditions one after the other. Poland also has shown a strong presence actually over the Antarctica by sending various expeditions, etc. South Africa, nowadays, most of the Indian expeditions actually, or the members fly from here up to South Africa, and from there, they charter a vessel which goes actually from South Africa to, to Antarctica. One of the earliest expeditions was actually, I would say, is actually Bayard Antarctic Expedition. And Bayard Antarctic Expedition, they have actually a station called Little America, which was established way back in 1934. This is one of the oldest covers of mine in the US. There's actually Little America, and this is a second cancellation. Several, these ones were actually sent to this post office, and most of them are actually very, very rare and very difficult conditions. So, and it was actually the first time they started radio broadcasting, again, which reminds me of actually my friend Bhagwati Prasad, again from Deal. He was actually a amateur ham operator. So he also had actually given me a couple of covers of that of the various Antarctic expeditions. So this was the first time when actually people started successful radio broadcasting, and that could be heard actually in US, which is about more than 11,000 or 18,000 kilometers. Wow. And the USA had actually various expeditions, starting with the Operation Deep Freeze. It's actually a code name which is given, and started from 1955 to 56, and they had a series of actually mostly supported by the US Naval, this one, and I won't go into that. I have several of these covers. I just given actually a two, just to show that. Russia also has actually two important, let us say, several expeditions prior to our, let us say, dissemination, and the Vostok Research Station, which is at a height of about over this one, has actually one of the coldest temperatures of 89.2, which was actually measured way back on 21st July 1983. And Progress is another station, research station of actually Russia in Antarctica. No doubt they have other things like say Mirny and so many other things. I won't go into Novolasaraya, etc. Just wanted to show you the signatures of two of our honorable postmasters. One is actually G. Sudhakar Rao, whom I mentioned. This is actually a signature with a date of 1st of February 1988, and there is actually another Postmaster General actually of Russia. This is actually another cover which you can be seen in the slide. Another interesting feature which I have actually with me is actually a registered letter. We always send actually a registered letter or speed post letter, etc., to various people. So I just thought I will share this is actually something which I have come close to, let us say, in my hands. You can see there's a cancellation of British Antarctic Territory, and there is also a ship cancellation of RRS Bransfield, and also a station cancellation of Harry Station. And it has a fantastic stamp on RRS James Clark Rose, again in Antarctica. Now this ship is actually now sold to Ukraine quite recently, so that Ukraine people actually can travel all the way from Ukraine to Antarctica. Another interesting thing about, basically we post a letter in actually some post office, but there can be several instances where letters are posted at sea. So that's what we call a paquebot. You can see a postal mark or a cancellation stamped on a mail, posted at sea or in a harbor for processing authorities. So these are some of the few examples of paquebot. There have been several. I won't go into the details of that, of the various countries. You can see the paquebot is actually put very, very prominently in most of the covers. Another interesting thing about philately is actually what we call gutter pairs. Gutter pairs are actually two stamps separated by a gutter, and the gutter block is actually a block of at least 4 stamps either in a vertical or horizontal pairs, and both are separated by a gutter. The gutter margin is actually a margin dividing the sheets of stamps or this one. All these stamps are actually from the Australian Antarctic territory. You can see the whales, the krill, aircraft, and also albatross. I won't go into those details. And there is so much of fauna in Antarctica. You can see Antarctic shag, Antarctic tern, Cape petrel, Antarctic tern, Cape petrel, Adelaide penguin, snowy sheathbill, Gentoo penguin. There are several things. All are actually of the Argentina, let us say, miniature sheep. There is so much of regional wildlife. In fact, one of the reasons why people would like to visit Antarctica is actually to see the regional wildlife over Antarctica, which is very, very prominent. You can see the Adelaide penguin, elephant seal, giant petrel, Weddell seal, emperor seal, etc. This again is actually of the Australian Antarctic territory. There have been several different types of whales, penguins, etc. We have the humpback whale, hourglass dolphin, minke whale, killer whale, etc. Again, this is again of the Australian Antarctic territory. And there are several different types of birds over Antarctica. Antarctic petrel, Wilson's petrel, snow petrel, fulmar, chinstrap penguin, emperor penguin, and all these are actually from the Ross Dependency cover. And there are different types of seals. We have the Weddell seal, crab-eater seal. In fact, my friend Vinod Dargalkar used to have actually some work on these different types of seals. He used to measure and all these sizes, etc. I still remember. There are different types of actually the leopard seals. And one interesting thing which I wanted to stress is actually you have actually a Mawson stand named after late Douglas Mawson, and with a husky pulling a sledge. One of the most important things in Antarctica is actually what we call Antarctica krill. This is highly rich in protein. It's actually one of the important trophic level connection, let us say connection, and especially at the end of the bottom of the food chain. They feed on the phytoplankton, zooplankton, and the main source of it is like actually highly rich in protein, just like the vegetarians have actually tur dal and whatnot. This is basically this in the bottom of the food chain where actually the whales eat tons of actually this krill. So on the left side, you can see the picture of actually krill taken by our marine biologists, Joachim Babenengole and late Dr. Parulekar, you can see. And the right side, we have actually the krill and this one of actually the Australian. This is again another fantastic picture actually on the marine life in Antarctica. They started with actually one finning up to, you can see up to 3 pounds sterling. The variety of actually the different species of actually the marine life in Antarctica, again by the British Antarctic Territory. I don't know read out the scientific names, but it's actually a very, very interesting and phenomena. Also, people do a variety of research, whether it's actually Antarctic marine biology, ornithology also, of the various birds, etc. Again, this again of the miniature sheet of actually Argentina. One important concept which has actually come is actually the whales. Whales in the oceans face far more threats than ever before, because the threats are intensifying and diversifying, and basically one is the climate change, the bycatch, entanglement in the fish gear, plastic pollution, noise pollution, chemical pollution, and ship strikes, and so many things. I won't go into the details. This is actually a British Antarctic first day cover with the sperm, fin, humpback, and blue whales. Next is actually a picture taken by me, by my old Minolta camera. One interesting feature you can see is actually, the spouting of this one, which is actually very, very interesting thing. In fact, this picture fetched me a runners-up prize during the World Oceans Day photography competition, which was held at NIO long back. So I'm very proud of that. Remember, in good old days, we don't have a camera like now where we actually 20 or 30 megapixels. We used to put actually a photographic film, carry the camera over there, take a picture. We are not sure whether the film is properly loaded, whether the image was actually shaken. So there are n number of issues actually with the camera. Then we have to come back and process in a place called Susa and Paul in Panjim. So we were not sure until and unless we get the final picture, we are not sure how the image is going to come. Or again, we cannot go back to Antarctica to capture the whales or the penguins, etc. This is, I was just mentioning about I was searching for several this one. So recently Ukraine has been actually in the news. So the Ukraine had actually a station which they purchased actually from Britain. They had a station called Faraday, named after Michael Faraday, and they purchased for actually only £1. And as I said, they also purchased the Michael Clark Rose research vessel also from UK. I won't go into the details of that. This is just to show you that Ukraine have their own research station in Antarctica. It's called Verdansk. As I was mentioning, tourism has been actually in this one. You can see this is actually a cover which was actually way back in 1975, almost 50 years back. The Argentinians have actually thought of actually having a tourism. So usually they carry the people between November and March every year. And summer season is the temperatures when are higher and the sea melts, so that gives access to the cruise ships in Antarctica to focus on the diverse wildlife. So most of the people would like to see the wilderness adventure, world-class wildlife, heroic history, like people would say Mawson's hut, Shackleton's hut, Scott's huts, etc., photographer's dream. And also people would like to see the peaceful continent, which nobody owns also. Another interesting thing which I wanted to highlight is actually there have been a pole to pole, as I was mentioning. People always used to say from Arctic to Antarctica. So this is the first time the Rose Dependency had actually a joint stamp issue with Greenland. So it shows actually a miniature sheet with actually a Greenland stamp of polar bear and actually the Rose Dependency stamp on actually a chinstrap penguin. The wildlife at the Arctic is totally different as compared to the Antarctica. So just to highlight these various things, and this was actually released way back in 2014. As I mentioned, there have been several things, like say this is actually a cover of actually South Korea, which actually just completed their stations of Antarctic Research Station. And the Antarctic scenarios have been fantastically captured by various countries. I would say it's actually on the top, we have actually Antarctic scene series with the dock team, sea ice, iceberg, mount coats, coastline, landfill, etc. In the bottom FDC, we have actually Prince Charles Mountains, iceberg alley of Mawson, brash ice, pancake ice, and emperor penguins, etc. And also, Australian National Antarctic Research Expeditions recently released the 50th anniversary of actually this NRA expeditions. I won't go into the details of that. So you can see there are two sets of Antarctica. One is actually by Japan. It was actually released in IGY, which was actually released in 1957-58. And the British Antarctic, this one also has actually released a series of actually, this is actually on the IGY year of actually 1957-58. Another interesting thing phenomena is actually what we call the Trans-Antarctic Expedition. So people would like to cross from one end of Antarctica to other. So you can see in the first cover how they have traveled all the way actually from one part of Antarctica, starting from Shackleton base up to the Scott base. You can see how they have traveled. So there are actually two different covers which actually showed. And this was actually sponsored mostly by private ventures. No doubt it has been sponsored by the governments of United Kingdom, New Zealand, United States, Australia, and South Africa. So you can see commemorating the first trans-Antarctic crossing. It's actually a heroic act in itself. Another interesting thing which has happened is actually the polar year. The global collaboration, especially in places like say Arctic and Antarctic, has been increasing substantially. So their international polar year was actually celebrated in 2007, 2008, where you can see there are several countries which have come and actually prepared several miniature sheets on the various themes. And the Australian Antarctic Territory, you can see they have actually stamps actually on astronomy, glaciology, marine biology, and oceanography. And there is also a stamp actually of polar star, again, from the West Germany. I won't go into the details of that. And there have been several interesting features, especially when you are during the south. After my 6th expedition to Antarctica, I was invited by Professor Jain Narlikar of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research to give a talk on the astronomy of Antarctica. I said there are 4 to 5 months we had actually a good time where we can observe Antarctica by night and also look at things like say Aurora Australis, etc. So I gave a talk way back, I think in 88 or 87 end. 88 end, I think, gave to at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai. And the Antarctica colors are actually brilliant. In fact, during our expedition, we have a gentleman called Mr. Kambli from the Film Institute from Pune, who had actually done a fantastic job. And you can see there are several colors which cannot be described. So this few stamps of the Australian Antarctic Territory clearly shows the colors of the Australian. And one of the most important things which people wanted to or mention is actually the Earth's polar regions, whether it's actually the North Pole or the South Pole, are actually dominated by the polar ice caps, both which rest actually in the Arctic Ocean and in the Antarctic Ocean, Antarctic continent. And this polar weather influences the climate areas, especially in the tropics, and I won't go into the details of that. It's actually tremendous. Now, a lot of people have actually asked me to explain a little bit actually what will happen in future. So one of the major things which I wanted to highlight is actually the effect of climate change. So you can see here, this series of stamps actually clearly shows how the Larsen shelf over the Antarctic region is actually breaking out thanks to the increase in surface temperatures. And not only that, there have been several studies which mentions that if all the ice, in fact, Antarctica has about 90% of the world's ice and 68% of the world's freshwater over there. If all the ice over Antarctica starts melting, the sea level will rise by about 65 meters. So it's actually a tremendous this one influence will have. It will change the salinity over the ocean and several things. I won't go into the details of that. I also would like to acknowledge a few people. One is Sri V R Navelkar, the founding member of the Goa Philately and Numismatic Society, who introduced me to the theme of Indian Antarctic Philately. I would like to thank Abhay Misraji of DL Dehradun, who wrote a book on Indian Antarctic Expedition, a Philately's Guide, which is available from Amazon. I also would like to thank Sri Abhay Tippu, who was earlier in Pune, now currently is actually in Australia, who gave me a series of stamps starting from 1957 to 2016. So, and I also would like to thank the organizers for providing me a platform, sharing this talk with this audience. And I also would like to thank all the audience for their kind attention in this one. So I'm ready to take a few questions. Either I can put in the chat box or you can ask me directly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rameshkumar sir. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Can I unshare? Sir, can I stop sharing?
Yeah, you can stop sharing, sir. Any question?
Hello, sir. This is Rohit Kamath from Bangalore. Every year, the Indian Oceanography site takes some covers from all over India. We could send them the post and then they used to get the cancellation back. Is that still available, sir?
Yeah, it is very much available. What you have to do is actually send your covers actually to the director NCPOR, Vasco da Gama. So they will carry whenever the expedition goes, they will carry from there, take it to whichever station, Maitri or Bharati, and bring it back and send it back to you. It is still being carried out. In fact, the Bharati cover cancellation, which I have shown it to you, it's actually we call it a carried cover. It is actually done. In fact, this is what Sri V R Navelkar used to do. He used to send about 100 covers and he used to get only 80 or 90 covers back. That's what he used to tell me. So this is still being carried out. religiously.
That's the reason I asked. I had sent one an year back. Nothing has been received back. So okay,
No, it is being done, sir. It is being done.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Panjikar madam, you can ask question.
Yeah, I wanted to know something about Aurora Australis. Can you mention something more?
Oh. Maybe my friend Ajay Darji is actually the right person. Actually, he is from Indian Institute of Geomagnetism. I am only a meteorology.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rameshkumar.
Yeah, Ajay Darji can mention.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rameshkumar, for a wonderful presentation. First of all, taking us right from the beginning to, is the picture postcards.
Ajay Darji, you are a veteran. You are a veteran man.
Yeah, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah, very much audible. You can just talk to the madam and explain.
Okay. Talking about Aurora Australis and Aurora Borealis, basically the names given to the aurora seen in two different hemispheres, in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. Aurora basically are caused by the charged particles which are emitted by the sun, and when they enter the Earth's magnetosphere, they interact with the charged particles which are already present in the atmosphere and give out visible lights. This is the particles, they gain energy and then they give this visible light. So this light can be seen mostly in the polar regions, what we call as the auroral region. But if the number of charged particles is very high, this auroral region can expand and it can be seen to the lower horizons also. So basically it is the interaction of charged particles coming from the sun and interacting with the charged particles of the Earth.
Thank you so much.
Any other question? So I think Ravindra sir, can you say something?
There was a question from somebody asking if the Antarctic expeditions are only restricted to scientists. I think you can answer that question.
Okay. Yeah, in fact, thank you, Dr. Ravindra ji. Basically, it is restricted only if it is sent by NC4. But as I mentioned, nowadays people can travel, as I said, as a tourist. There was actually a Cochin travel agency. If you, as I mentioned, 6 lakh rupees if you have in your pocket, you can pay and they will fly from, let's say, Cochin up to Argentina or Chile. And from there, either they will take you by an aircraft or by their own ships. So tourism is actually this one. In fact, I showed that special cover. Mind you, this cover was actually way back in 1975. So the Argentine people had actually thought of actually having tourism almost 50 years back. So people have been doing as that's what I said. Now, if you have 6 lakh rupees in your bank or in your pocket, you just pay the air freight from here up to Argentina or Chile. And from there, either they will take by their own aircraft or maybe their own boats, etc. In fact, there was actually a program in a channel called Safari, whereby one gentleman called Santosh George Kolangara had actually showed how he travels from actually Kerala or Cochin to Antarctica and back using tourism, this one. So tourists can be done, no doubt about that. But we had gone, thanks to Government of India, Ministry of Earth Sciences, as well as Department of Ocean Development. We had gone through the government channel properly for our research proposals. Whereas the other one you paid amount, mind you, way back in 1986-87, Government of India spent a huge amount of money. Dr. Ravindra, Ajay Darji, and so many people know, because first of all, we have to charter a research vessel, which is actually a double hull vessel or an ice-breaking vessel. We have to have almost 2 weeks training in high altitude warfare school, either in Sonamar, Gulmarg, etc. We have to have actually a medical test at AIMS. So the N number of things which needs to be done before going. So it's actually huge, this one. And unless and until we have actually a proper research program to go to Antarctica, Government of India cannot spend that much money. Whereas if you are rich enough, as I said, you can spend some couple of lakhs, maybe 5 or 6 lakhs, travel as a tourist and then come back.
Any other question?
One more. This research station which you have in Dakshin Gangotri, is it working round the year or it is?
Okay. Now it is submerged, madam. It is all submerged because it was on an ice shelf. Because we have only 2 research stations. One is actually Maitri and Bharati. Basically, if you keep a hot object actually on an ice shelf, what will happen? The inside temperatures will be about 25-26 degrees Celsius. So when you keep a hot object over the ice shelf, it actually just went. In fact, I had a picture. Maybe I didn't want to. I couldn't show that of Dakshin Gangotri. Other two stations I saw. Whereas Maitri as well as a barrier actually on the rocks. Okay. Whereas this was actually an ice shelf. So the entire station, two-story building submerged actually into the ice shelf. So we have only 2 research stations, and maybe in future, NC4 will have actually more and more research stations in Antarctica, because we are one of the few countries which have actually multiple research stations in Antarctica, which is a very, very important thing. Australia has, Britain has, US has, so several countries have actually. So maybe we'll have more research stations in future over Antarctica.
Thank you. It was very interesting.
Ramani sir, anything you want to say?
Nothing, Dr. Vartak, nothing much to say. I enjoyed the talk. It was very good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Ramu sir, no, as a philatelist, I also would like to have your comments and this thing, because those are also very interesting.
Sir, nothing from my end, sir. I really enjoyed. Always pleasure to listen to Dr. Ramesh, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, Ramuji. In fact, I'm only a baby, I should say, because when I look at, in fact, another gentleman called one of same name, Rameshkumar Chennai, has actually huge collection of Antarctica covers of various countries. So he was promising me that he'll give one of these days, maybe next time when I went to Chennai, maybe I'll collect more from him, and maybe.
I think sir Nair sir also joined, no?
Who?
Nair, Mohan Chandra.
Yeah, Mohan, yeah, I have seen, sir.
But I think he can also say something about Philatelic part.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
sir.
No,
Yes,
actually,
sir,
I want more philatelic questions.
Yes, sir. I enjoyed very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
It was an excellent presentation.
Sorry, sir, I may be a bit fast because I wanted to cover everything in a such as. So I actually, let's say, didn't put several stamps and covers. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your encouragement and support.
Very nice.
Koru madam, you can ask any.
How many days the expedition for the tourists are there?
Oh, that's a good question. In fact, I went as actually this one of summer. We have actually 2 different ways of actually going. What is what we call a summer expedition. We usually go sometime in the month of November from Goa. Reach there, as I said, we reached on 21st of December. Again, we come back sometime in the month of March. Okay. Sometimes there is actually, let us say, wintering also. As a tourist, it depends upon actually on our pocket. So usually maybe about a week or so. Basically, they will show the Antarctic wildlife, maybe take you to a small mountain, maybe take you to a lake, maybe show a few seals, penguins.
Okay.
So at the most a week or 2, depending upon how much money we are paying.
Okay. Any prerequisite of experiences, like minimum trekking in ice, being in ice?
Yeah, that's what. In fact, that's what. In fact, I would like to thank Dr. Joachim Goyes. In fact, once I was caught actually in a snow blizzard. But for Dr. Joachim Goyes, I would not been sitting in front of you and giving this talk or bhashan. Because I was actually caught actually in a snow blizzard, thanks to Dr. Joachim Goyes, who rescued me from the snow blizzard and brought. And basically, as I mentioned, this 2 weeks training in high altitude warfare school is actually how to walk on ice. We have ice craft and so many things which are being taught. We stayed 2 days on a Machoi glacier. So before going to Antarctica is actually a very, very tough, let us say 2 weeks training in horse. Then going to Antarctica is like a cakewalk. But the tourists, most of the tourists don't have to undergo these things.
Okay.
But they have to be physically fit because, as I said, Antarctica is a high altitude continent.
Yes.
So there are several things, and maybe walking on ice and so many things, and you have to sleep on the bunker beds. Life may not be so easy as you wish. You will not get a 5-star treatment over Antarctica.
Yes.
And food was actually
Ramu here.
Food was actually a major issue, madam. Food, because I'm a vegetarian, by the way. In fact, luckily we had actually CFTRA, Central Food Technological Research Institute, which used to prepare fantastic food. Also, so was the case for actually Defense Food Research Laboratory. So we had also a fantastic naval cook also, who used to prepare from rasam to whatnot, almost all the food, whatever we thought of. So we had actually fantastic support from Central Food Technological Research Institute, Mysore, Defense Food Research Laboratory. So several food actually is actually, I could call it actually, canned food was actually taken, heat and eat type of chapatis and whatnot. So many things were actually carried.
Nice.
And Antarctica is like a big deep freezer.
Yeah.
Nothing goes bad or whatever. Maybe Dr. Kasim, late Dr. Kasim has taken, still will be available without much of a problem. Still now.
Thank you.
Ma'am, here I would like to add, one Mr. Kishore Chandak from Solapur went for 4 days last October. And he did as a tourist at the age of close to 70 years. He went to Antarctica for 4 days, ma'am.
Okay, great. Yeah. Some of the trekking group also can think of it.
Yeah, it was a trekking group only. Mr. Chandak, Mr. Kishore Chandak from Solapur, he went as a tourist along with the trekking group.
Yeah.
And he spent almost 4 or 5 days in Antarctica, ma'am.
Okay. We have our trekking group. Let us see things.
Any more question?
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there life during the other months? I mean,
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, madam. In our group, we have actually one gentleman called Bajaj. He's actually come from Defense Institute of Allied and Psychological Sciences. The psychology of the people who will be doing wintering is actually very different. Maybe see Ajay Darji and my colleague Dr. Vinod Darkalkar, Vinod had actually gone one in Davis as well as in Dakshin Gangotri. It's very tough, madam. Because no doubt you will have actually so much of winter, and not only that, it's almost 24 hours almost of darkness. When we have actually summer here, peak summer, July, August, etc., it's actually almost hardly any sunlight, except for a few this ones you can see. So it is very tough. Since we are used to so much of sunlight, just the opposite. So even when we went in Antarctica during the southern summer, we were not sure whether it's at 12 midnight or 12 noon. So that actually the biological clock, so many things do affect your, let us say the psychology changes totally. And mind you, 15 to 16 people are actually clubbed together in the same place. Just imagine, for about 16 months is not a joke. So it is a tough strain on your, let us say, mental health even. Just for your mental health, unless you are occupied. A very tough thing.
Very nice.
Many people have thanked you, sir, for your excellent talk in the chat box.
Shankar sir, anything you want to say?
Hello, good evening to all of you. I just punched in a couple of messages for Dr. Rameshkumar.
Yes,
I said a classic case of education through philately.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed your talk.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And also I was reminded of my friend Dr. Suresh Kumar, who reads old literature, English literature. And when somebody whom we were expecting turned up, he said, "Dar she blows."
Yeah.
Dar she blows is, he explained to me how, sailors in the olden times used to exclaim, "Dar she blows," when a whale came sprouting water. So I was reminded
I will add a few more things. In fact, I joined NIS thanks to an English book called Moby Dick, which was written by Herman Melville. So I had actually, after my master's, I had opportunity to join 3 places. One was actually Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, to work on a project called Mountain Waves. The second was actually to work with the Professor R. Anandakrishnan, who incidentally was the student of Sir C.B. Raman at Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology on an Air India fellowship. The third was actually at NIO. So I was fascinated, as I mentioned, about oceans and things and whatnot. So this Moby Dick is actually a book which, in a whale, wants to take a revenge on a captain. So as you said, I was also fascinated by that book. Because of that book, I am at NIO and I got an opportunity. And I also would like to thank late Dr. Parulekar, who found me I'm actually physically fit and seaworthy person to go past the roaring 40s and furious 50s.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rameshkumar sir, for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I think with this we'll conclude the today's lecture. I think Ramu sir has mentioned about Kishore Chandak from Sholapur, who has visited Antarctica. But I think Ramu sir Chandak is, I think, very famous philatelist also.
Exactly.
Correct, sir.
Yes, because I know him because he's a member of our society also.
Yeah, I know Chandak sir. I know Chandak sir. In fact, that's what.
He's a fantastic collector and a huge collection. Correct. So I think Rameshkumar sir, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
For
thank
giving
you.
This very good, nice presentation.
Thank you, sir.
And with this, I think we'll conclude today's session. Next month, I think we'll meet for some other lecture on philately also on the same time, that is 4th Saturday. So with this, I think we'll stop today's lecture. And thank you again, Ramesh.